Hi everyone, this is CJ with Cycletron. Today I'd like to talk about motorcycle helmets. I've worn full-face helmets while riding motorcycles ever since I started riding about 40 years ago. I think they provide the maximum protection for riding. One consideration is apparently about 70% of the impacts of a motorcyclist, if they go down and hit their head or their face area, about 70% of it is in this front area, the chin, face, forehead, and obviously a full face helmet's going to provide you the most protection as opposed to, say, a 3/4 or even half helmet. So, these helmets aren't cheap. I have purchased Shoei helmets for the last several helmets that I've owned. I intended to buy a new Shoei helmet as a replacement. This helmet is 7 years old, and I've had it for about 5 years. So the guidance on motorcycle helmets is that you should buy a new helmet if you've had it in service for 5 years or the total age is 7 years or more. Now, considering these helmets are about $500 a pop, that's kind of a hard one to say, hey, I'm going to shell out another $500 just because my helmet's old or I've had it for 5 years or more. But I want to talk about a few reasons why it still may be a good idea to step up and do that. As I indicated, I intended to buy a Shoei, but ended up getting an Arai this go around just because they didn't have the Shoei that I wanted in stock. I ended up going to Cycle Gear. I first went to my local metric dealer. They had quite a few helmets, but their selection this go around was pretty thin. Cycle Gear had a lot more, but one thing I was surprised about is I apparently had bought this helmet after it was already 2 years past its manufacture date, so I was starting out with an older helmet to begin with. So one of the first things you want to do when you're either buying a new helmet or you're looking to replace a helmet is look inside the liner. Most of them you'll have to pull the inner liner out, and there'll be a sticker that indicates the month and year of manufacture. On the Arais, that date is stamped on the D-ring, so you'll have to look for that, but somewhere on the helmet will be the manufacture date. So for me, considerations on a new helmet would be what type of visor mechanism does it have? Does it have an internal shade visor? So this one has an internal visor. Now, there are two certifying agencies for motorcycle helmets. One's Snell and the other is DOT. If it has an internal visor, it won't be eligible for Snell certification, apparently. So for me, Snell's supposedly the gold standard for certification, but I think DOT is adequate. I wouldn't sweat whether or not it had Snell certification myself, as long as it had DOT certification. But, really the part of the helmet that does most of the protection for a person's head is the expanded polystyrene liner, basically styrofoam, that goes on the inside of the helmet. Really, the shell is just to provide protection to that liner and also to distribute an impact over a broader area. So one of the things that could degrade a helmet over time is, let's say you just banging around, you maybe hit the concrete island at a pump island if you're swinging your helmet around, or if it drops off your seat. That's one thing. I always set my helmet on the ground. I don't put it on my motorcycle seat or someplace where it could fall off and potentially get damaged. The problem with a motorcycle helmet is if it does compress the EPS liner from an impact, you're not going to see it. So maybe one reason to replace a helmet after 5 years of service is that you might have accumulated a lot of minor impacts that's degraded the effectiveness of the liner. So once it's been deformed, it's plastic deformation. It's not going to spring back. It's like jamming your thumb in Play-Doh. Once you've done that, you've left an indentation that doesn't recover. So I think that might be a reason. Another reason might be to take advantage of new vent designs. I have to say, comparing the two, I think this Arai turned out to be a little more comfortable, but I like the visor mechanism better on my Shoei. I like the inner shade visor on my Shoei, and the Shoei actually has less wind noise than this Arai. But I'm pretty happy with both. As I mentioned, though, the Arai is way more comfortable, and I think the venting's a little bit better on the Arai. So, what do you all think out there? Could you bring yourself to replace a helmet because it aged out in terms of manufacturer's recommendations on either 7 years of total age or 5 years in service? What do you do with the old helmet? For me, I'm just going to keep them. If I ever get into a situation where, you know, the other helmet's damaged or I can't use it, I can use the old one as a spare until I have time to buy a new one. Or you might use it for a passenger who might ride with you on occasion. The other thing, this is my personal philosophy, but you know, it's up to an individual how much protection they want to have when riding a motorcycle. I mean, in general, riding a motorcycle can be inherently more dangerous than driving a car just from a protection standpoint. And then you get into, you know, do you wear gloves? Do you wear jackets? Do you wear riding pants? Back protector, high-vis clothing. You know, it's kind of a sliding scale in terms of what an individual wants to do. But, you know, I've taught all my kids that they're only going to ride if they wear a full-face helmet. It's sort of like a seatbelt law. In Missouri, they repealed the helmet law for people under the age of 26, but they have mandatory seatbelt laws like pretty much every state does. Yet in Missouri, they post the number of fatalities that they've had throughout the year on lighted road signs. And every year it's about 900 road deaths, which is sheer carnage. And so far, year to date, it's about 450. So they're on track for 900 again. But the other statistic that they post is that 2/3 of those fatalities occur with people who are unbuckled. So despite there being a state law, and despite the fact that most people would agree that it's safer to travel in a car when you're wearing a seatbelt versus not wearing a seatbelt, many people choose not to wear seatbelts. Not the way I would go. And the same way with helmets. I'm gonna wear a helmet when I ride, but if you don't, that's your business as far as I'm concerned. I will say though, if you're gonna put a kid on a motorcycle, I would buy the best helmet, even if it was the most expensive one, because they've got younger brains to protect. It's problematic enough for an adult, but particularly for kids, I think you gotta get them the very best helmet. I was talking to a parts guy who sells helmets at the dealership, and he said you'd be surprised how many people look for the very cheapest helmet to put on their kids when they ride motorcycles. So what do you all think about these topics? Please let me know in the comments section, and stay tuned for future videos. Thanks very much.